At the same time, an extraordinary development here in Washington, even Uber hawk Lindsey Graham says he's done funding Ukraine with the blank check unless it comes with a border security package, stunning, I guess, everybody involved. Here's what he had to say.
I think there are votes for Israel apart from the package. Republicans overwhelmingly support Israel, so do most Democrats. Republicans are divided on Ukraine. Republicans are 100% behind strong border security. If you want aid to Ukraine, we need to control our southern border. I will not vote for any aid until we secure our own border. Reform asylum, reform parole is possible to do. Democrats don't want to do it. All Republicans want to do it. I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves.
So we are not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves. Where has this man been all my life? But I can, Krystal, offer some inside reporting from people that I have spoken to on Capitol Hill who are involved in this. A lot of this is a feint from Lindsey Graham and from others. They have come to terms with the fact that Ukraine is dead on its own in terms of just aid going through. $61 billion. So what they have done is kind of co-opted this America First framework or whatever by trying to shoehorn a border security package that would be acceptable to the House Republicans, at least in rhetoric. So Lindsey Graham is trying to telegraph, no, guys, I'm on your side as these negotiations continue. Now, from what I understand, those negotiations are actually not going well at all. You had multiple of the sides who were nitpicking against each other, and these negotiations, or at least talks, whatever, continue on Capitol Hill. But I think the rhetoric itself, when even Lindsey is forced to saying something like that, you got to know that, what is the phrase, like the goose is cooked, or something like that.
Well, not only that, but you increasingly have administration officials admitting things aren't going well, admitting that we need to push for some sort of a resolution of this conflict. You even have, officials within Zelensky's government admitting they're at a stalemate, admitting things are not going well. They're not saying, okay, well, let's come to some sort of a negotiated settlement of this. And by the way, it's a real question whether that's even on the table at this point, because as we've discussed before, if you're Russia, you feel like you're winning. Why do you feel like you want to bargain or negotiate at this point?
Yes. Right.
The time when we should have done that was back when there were peace talks at the beginning of the war that we, of course, short-circuited and said we don't want, even if it is a real possibility. And listen, you never know until the thing is done and dusted. But we now have all of these admissions that many of the key details had been resolved. And we and the UK were the major roadblocks to getting that done. And Ukraine was, of course, in a much better and stronger negotiating position at that point because they had outperformed in the early days of the war. And because Russia looked like they were in, total chaos, disarray, they had dramatically underperformed. It was humiliating. There were a lot of questions about what was going to happen with their economy. There was some dissent and domestic unrest within Russia itself. So, that ship has sailed. But now administration officials and even people like Lindsey Graham floating the end of this conflict is pretty extraordinary. The last thing I'll say in terms of this package that is supposed to be border security, Israel, and Ukraine. At this point, all three pieces of that are very controversial. I mean, the border security piece, what Democrats are going to accept there and what everybody can agree on, that's, of course, always controversial. Ukraine has become extremely controversial, certainly within the Republican Party, but also, as I said, even Democrats now acknowledging we've got to have some kind of end in sight here. And then on the Israeli aid, we've covered how there are increasing discussions, and not just from Bernie Sanders and AOC, but from, sort of normal, democratic, mainstream, traditional members of the caucus who are saying, hey, maybe we need to condition aid to Israel as well. So every single piece of that package has become extraordinarily controversial.
That is an excellent point, and I also want to take an opportunity to say this. This is why I hate bundling all these things together, and each one of these are absurd on its face. If you support Israel, why would you want to have Israel funding tied to Ukraine? If you support Ukraine, or let's say you support a border security package, I definitely support a hell of a lot of reforms for the U.S. border. Why should the U.S. border policy, security, and funding be subject to literally funding a foreign war? Each one of these should be debated and presented on its face. Now, I'm not naive, and I know that's not the way that it works. But the reason that they do it is so that people like Lindsey, who have hidden agendas, and all these other Republicans on Capitol Hill who want to defy the will of their voters, who don't support more funding for Ukraine can hide behind it and, dangle some shimmery package about some fake border thing. Now, I have no idea if it will even materialize or if it has any sort of chance of passing the House of Representatives, but do not think that the fight over Ukraine funding is dead at all. And that really brings us to what I wanted to spend some time on here, which is just a shocking, a heartbreaking report about U.S. policy towards Ukraine. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. These were two key findings from a months-long investigation into the failure of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And I put them up side by side because they're two separate stories. The first was about U.S. military planning. I want to let some of this sink in. The United States held, quote, 8 tabletop exercises at a certain point to try and game out what the Ukrainians should do. They advocated focused assaults by the Ukrainians amongst the southern axis. They encouraged them to basically take all of the weapons, material in them, and then run into fortified Russian positions at the hope of a breakthrough. They did this despite tons of intelligence that they were being told, the United States military was being told, the chances of Ukrainian breakthrough in these types of conditions, not going to happen. So the U.S. itself basically encouraged an entire generation of Ukrainian young men to run into their deaths in this counteroffensive, and it didn't even work. So we are very much to blame in this. But there's another side of this coin too. The Ukrainian military leadership is arrogant and largely incompetent. Something that we talked about endlessly here on the show was the defense of Bakhmut, about how they were blowing billions of dollars of ammo and artillery and all these other things to eventually fight a battle that they would always going to lose. And it turns out the U.S. military was like, hey, you probably should conserve some of that for your counteroffensive. They were said, oh no, we know best. Then, even though we provided them with all these Leopards and all these other Western, this Western military equipment that they had asked for, is that much of it was destroyed in a single battle, and that they were incompetently employing it. They did not listen to the U.S. military advisors. They retreated to Soviet tactics. Much of the troops that they had, 70% of them had never seen combat before. They were totally green. The Western military training that they tried to do over the course of a year, and in some cases a summer, for many of these troops is a total failure. I mean, how many times do we have to learn the lesson? From Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan, to the Syrian, what was it, the good militias or whatever they were called, the good rebels, even Korea to a certain extent. We cannot competently train and equip a foreign military. It just doesn't work. And yet we pour billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars into this end. And I just want to end on this. I'm trying aptly to place the blame on the hands of the military, who really encouraged a lot of these guys to just run into their death. So in some respects, I sympathize with those people who were like, oh, we should have given Ukraine long-range missiles, air power, and all of this. But what comes through on the Ukrainian side is a couple of things. Number one, these people are not trustworthy. They're incredibly arrogant. They absolutely would have used it to attack Russia. And we have intercepts, spying, leaked records and all of that confirms it. So it was irresponsible on our part to do so. Number two, they were incompetent from the get-go, and we're never going to succeed in this counteroffensive. And then really three is that at this point, when you combine the worst of all worlds of our policy, you have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian young men who are either dead or maimed for the rest of their life and are out of the fight. We brought people the recruitment news last time about how the average age of the Ukrainian fighting male right now is 43 years old. Krystal, there are 600,000 Ukrainian fighting age males who have fled the country. They don't want to fight. Morale is at an all-time low. At this point, they're conscripting anybody that can even move, even with prior medical dischargement. I mean, as I've said previously, this is what it looks like in the last days of resistance. Now, I don't know how much longer they can hold on. Defensive is obviously a better position to be in, but this is a horrible situation for Ukraine. And the U.S. really did hang them. We bled them dry. We encouraged them not to take a peace deal. We bled them to degrade the Russian military, even though by many respects we've sharpened them to be more combat effective than they've ever been before. We taught them these new lessons about next generation combat. And at this point, Jake Sullivan, I'll just end on this. He said yesterday, anybody who doesn't vote for the $61 billion package to Ukraine is a vote for Putin. That's basically what he said. But I would put it the other way. If you vote for $61 billion for Ukraine, you are voting to bleed the last able-bodied Ukrainian men dry. You're voting to bleed them dry for maybe a few square miles of territory in the hopes of reaching peace deal that was on the table in April of 2022. How is that a defensible policy? It's not.
It's absolutely not. It truly sickens me the way that we have used Ukraine and used Ukrainian military age fighting men in particular as pawns in our effectively like imperial game, hoping we can degrade Russia, hoping we can give Russia a bloody nose. It sickens me. It truly disgusts me because you are right. We hung these people out to dry. And here's the other piece that I want people to really take in. Think of how you have been lied to during this conflict. Lied to about the possibility of a peace deal. Lied to about, the Nord Stream pipeline as one example. But in particular from this report, lied to about who really was in charge here. It has always been the U.S. who's been governing the time, manner, and direction of the fighting. We have always had a say in the direction of this war. And instead, Biden and other officials always, it's, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and it's all on them, and we're just trying to help them. Bullshit. It has always been a complete lie. The other thing that I'll say about this is, okay, well, why are these things coming out now? Mm-hmm. And, it's not that the reporting couldn't have been done earlier, et cetera, but you now have this very clear realization that this thing has gone completely sideways. And so you've effectively got U.S. officials and Ukrainian officials trying to blame shift. The U.S. officials are leaking about how it's the Ukrainians' fault and they're incompetent and we told them what to do and they didn't listen, et cetera. And the Ukrainians leaking that, no, they don't understand the reality of the war that we're fighting and they hung us out to dry and we didn't have the equipment we needed. That's what's going on here. I mean, you see this all the time. I hate sports analogies, but you see this too when the team starts losing, everybody starts sniping at each other, everybody starts blaming each other. You see it in political campaigns. Just go and look at what's happening in the Ron DeSantis campaign right now of this one blaming the other one and this one getting fired. And this is the problem with the campaign. No, that's the problem with the campaign. That's the stage we're at right now in the Ukraine war, is everyone just trying to leak to the press to set the narrative of what the hell actually went wrong here. And so that's increasingly why you see these reports that give you some insight into what was going on behind the scenes. That's why these are coming out right now.
Yes, and let's spend some time on that, about the lying and also about the reporting. This was evident from day one. I was saying it here on Bakhmut. You can roll the tape. We're saying it 6 months ago. And it's funny. All of the professional military analysts were lying to our face. Now, I don't speak ill of former employers and of people who helped me out in the past, but there are a lot of organizations who are out there who were absolutely spinning things with all of these maps and all of these releases and leaking to the New York Times. People of real prestige with real military experience who went all over TV, the pundit generals, all these former NATO commanders, EUCOM commanders, all this stuff. BS! Everything they said was a lie. And all of it was a lie perpetrated to just continue the money flowing into Ukraine. And the thing is, too, about the money is if it would actually make a difference, I think that there is a little more of a debate on this. I would still be against it. But we have their own admission. They are stealing everything not nailed to the floor. They're the most corrupt, one of the most corrupt nations in the entire world. How many untold billions of dollars have been stolen from this aid? We don't even have an inspector general. We'll never find out. At least we found out some of it in Afghanistan. The troops on the front line, according to many Western reporters, even joke about how they are getting suboptimal supplies because so much corruption has leaked down to them. They're the ones who are fighting. They're the ones who are dying. 600,000 of them don't even want to fight. What is the point of continuing all of this? And the worst part is that previously Russia might have negotiated. But now, since the West has basically moved on from Ukraine, why would you negotiate? I've said this before too. If I'm Russia, I got a hardened economy. I got industry spinning up. Russia is pumping out more ammunition than all of NATO combined. As I've said before, we did them a favor. We sharpened their military. We got rid of their useless initial generals. They've got their tactics down pretty well. They're in a well-hardened defense battle position. they've got missiles that they're pumping out. They've got these new drones and other things that they're experimenting with the help of the North Koreans and of the Iranians. They're raining terror down on Ukraine. Ukraine is in a far, far worse position for its survival than it has been really since the beginning and early days of the war. Nobody is more to blame, I think, here than Washington. So congratulations to all of the people who supported this grift and this tragedy, I think, from the very beginning, because most of it could have been avoided. And it really is just, yeah, it's sickening. It really is sickening. When it does eventually come to an end, we'll see the final toll.
That's exactly right. All of this time and money spent for what? What has been accomplished here? Nothing. Just lives lost, destruction, for Ukraine to be in a worse position than they were at the beginning of this war. It is just a catastrophic failure. It's a humiliation. It is a moral rot. It is disgusting what has unfolded. The last, this is kind of a side note, but it piqued my interest, and I wanted to note it from one of the Washington Post reports. They talked about the centrality of these very inexpensive drones, which was also something that Hamas used to great effect in their horrors on October 7th. But they said Russia is deploying fleets of these hand-built attack drones. Ukraine is deploying them as well. They cost less than $1,000 each and can disable a multi-million-dollar tank.
Yep.
I think that is going to be, putting this particular conflict aside, but as we look forward to the future of conflict and war fighting and guerrilla war fighting, et cetera, some of these technological advances are, really terrifying for our troops abroad, for what these conflicts are going to look like in terms of evening the playing field here. And I think the drones and the use of them, very inexpensive, effectively off the shelf at this point, is kind of the bleeding edge of some of this leveling of the technological playing field.
There's a lot to be said about that, because for years there was something in military speak called the revolution in military affairs. The Gulf War showed everybody, the shock and awe campaign of 2003. Everyone's like, warfare's changed forever. Technology has changed the game. Except in the biggest war since World War II, it looks more like 1914 than any book I've ever read about supposed drone warfare and all of that in 2025. Instead, it seems that technology and asymmetric warfare has flattened the battlefield and reverted tactics back to historical levels than any sort of fifth-generation fighter aircraft that was promising that no American soldier ever had to be put in harm's way. So there's a ton of military lessons on this. I'm sure there's a lot of geeks at West Point and all these others who are studying it, but a lot of them are grim lessons for the billions of dollars that we've poured into Lockheed, Raytheon, and all these other people in the hope of keeping us safe. Why don't we move on to disinformation?
Indeed. We'll save a deeper conversation on that for another day.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.